in Beyond the Thunder, we have a lot of different rhythmic values. And so we can kind of think of this from a teaching point of view as, we have long notes versus short notes. And then we also have long notes versus really long notes. And how are we going to teach our students to differentiate between those? How are we going to teach them how to use their bows so they can play this properly and hopefully stay together and not fall apart? Now, as Miss Monday indicates in the program notes, every group is going to interpret this differently, and they're going to have their own way of stylizing it, and that's great. But everybody within the group should sort of agree on that interpretation, and they should all be able to play each eighth note, each quarter note, each half note, each dotted half note, each whole note tied to another whole note the same way, and that means they need to be in the same part of the bow. So as teachers, how do we make those bowings uniform? So what I like to do is I like to just play one rhythmic value at a time. I start with the whole notes, and I try to get my students to play from frog to tip and make them all play the same with the same amount of bow. If I've got most of them playing from frog to tip and a few of them playing with not very much bow at all, we're going to have to fix that. And one of the ways to fix that is to make sure that the students are using a good bow hand. Check the thumb and make sure the thumb's not bent like this, and make sure that the pinky's not doing something wild, hanging over or jetting out or something, because that creates tension in the wrist. And if you think about what's involved for playing a whole note from getting frog to tip, there's a lot of different things that go on. You got your fingertip movement to your wrist movement. You've got your wrist movement to your elbow movement. You've got your elbow to your shoulder at the frog and at the tip part of the bow where that shoulder activates. So do your students know all that? Do they know all of these little details on how to bow? Maybe, maybe not. But if they've got a good bow hand, and they've got enough grip on the string, that should occur naturally. If you've got enough friction to kind of keep the bow put in the bowing lane, this stuff is going to work out well on its own, and it's going to kind of straighten out the bow. They don't have to manually use their wrist a certain way and their fingertips. That's too much to think about. Just make sure there's enough rosin on the bow, and they set their bow on the string. They get that grip. They can wiggle that string and then pull the bow and then pull the bow, and their body should shape to the phenomenon of resisting against the string. There's some other exercises that we can use. If it says in the program notes that you could teach this to a first-year orchestra. So a lot of times in our first-year orchestra, they still kind of need help tuning their instruments or at least go around and check them. So as you're going around checking tuning from one student to another and you're picking up the instrument, okay, this is good, or you're making adjustments, whatever, you can have them do exercises while you're doing that, to improve the pacing and efficiency of your class. That way they're not just sitting doing nothing or staring at the wall or whatever. I don't know what they do. But, I like to have them do bow push-ups where they can take their pencils or even their bows if they're advanced enough, and they can just push it up, push it up, push it up, and that gets their wrists and fingertips involved. And you can add the next level of that. You can have them do what I call rocket ships, where they use the whole bow to go this way. Okay, and you can even have them go side to side, bow push-ups this way, and you can do rocket ships this way as well. I wouldn't do the rocket ships with the bow because, they might poke their stand partner in the eye or get poked in the eye. So using pencils, I think, would work well. And the pencils are also lighter, so it helps them be able to do these exercises a little bit easier till they get used to it. But it gets them loosened up to where they can start having good bow hands and using their bows effectively. In Season 1, Episode 1, I have a demonstration video on these various techniques that I use in class, and it also includes my peer-to-peer coaching method that I use in my classes, where I have the inside player play and the outside player coach, and then we flip it around. And this means that they're always being observed, or they're observing. They're actively participating in the process, and they're not just doing bow push-ups, like this, and, they're just looking around the room. They're engaged in the process, and someone's keeping an eye on them, and then they're keeping an eye on their stand partner or whoever they're next to. Another strategy that I like to use for long bows is using motion, using your body, your whole body to play. Now, you can open up the chest this way, or you can lean a little bit in one way or the other. I really like having them use motion, and especially really early on. I like to have them start moving as soon as possible because it's kinesthetic. It feels good to move, and it's really good for your retention. If students can move around and they feel good while they play, they're going to want to play more. They're going to want to practice more. They're going to want to get the instrument out more. And moving is fairly simple to do, and it's something that they can be successful at quite early. Sometimes, I've been to schools and their choice cards go out in October. So by October, your beginners are having to choose whether or not they're going to stay in orchestra for next year. If you get them doing something right, if they feel successful in your classroom, they're much more likely to tick that orchestra box for next year. If they're not feeling successful, if they don't feel like they're doing a whole lot and they're just going through the method book plucking D and A, it's like, what? This is orchestra? Like, what is this? I'm not even playing anything. And they might not tick the box. They might decide, well, maybe this is not for me. Maybe I'm not good at this. And if I'm not good at it, well, it's not worth the effort. So I'm going to go do something else. So use motion. It's something that makes them successful right off the bat, and something that helps them to stay in orchestra. I want to talk a little bit about instrument quality. I don't think it's fair that our beginning students have the worst instruments out of everybody. They have enough problems. They're trying to learn this complicated process, and then we give them a piece of firewood and a toothpick to bow with. For a lot of beginners, it's recommended that we give them fiberglass bows. Most of them are plastic. They don't have any actual fibers in them. Fiber reinforcement, you don't really need them. But in any case, just if they've got whatever equipment they've got, at the very least, make sure that they've got quality bow hair. If the bow hair is brittle and it doesn't hold rosin anymore, they're not going to have the right equipment to be able to feel that resistance on the string. It's just not going to work the same. So yeah, you can get them a $40 fiberglass bow, but make sure that the bow hair is in good condition, and make sure that they put rosin on their bow. I've seen some orchestras do their bowing exercises on their cake of rosin, and it's a cool idea. It is a lot of rosin, though, and trust me, I'm a big believer in rosin, and that's one way to hold them accountable to rosin their bows every day. If you're going to do that, though, make sure that you take your cleaning cloth and kind of wipe down the bow a little bit, because it's probably way too much rosin. Or just kind of tap your bow on the side of your shoe and kick off some of that excess rosin. And then when you're done playing, of course, wipe down the strings and wipe down the bow. You should be doing that anyway, but if you're doing all of your bowing exercises on your rosin, yeah. And for your bass players, you probably don't want to use like Pops rosin or that viscous rosin. Just have them use regular rosin for their bowing exercises, because that's, if you put too much Pops rosin on your bow hair, it's really hard to get off, and you can over rosin that bow really quickly. Like it's not like the more solid rosins where you can just wipe them down or kick off the excess. It's really hard to get that stuff off. It's very messy. So it's good rosin, though. It's good for bass players. But yeah, if you do all of your bow warm-ups on Pops rosin, it's going to ruin your bow hair. All right, so we've gone over the long bows, sort of the whole note bows. Well, what about the really long bows? What about this place right here where we've got these whole notes tied to whole notes here in measure 5 and 6, 7 and 8, and the violas? And if our students are having trouble doing the 4-count down bows, doing an 8-count down bow, 8-count up bow is going to be even more challenging. I would actually recommend to the students that they do staggered bows here, and I'd have them write in some staggered bows. And in this part right here, it might not be as big a deal, but as we go on a little further in the piece to hear first violins, cellos, and basses, we've got a whole note tied to a dotted half note, and this is forte, whereas before we're mezzo piano. So to really get that power and do what we're supposed to do with the dynamics, it might be good to use staggered bows here. For the long bows, just make sure that we've got really good technique, and for the really long bows, staggered bows are going to fix a lot of our problems. If you're going to go the whole 8 counts, that's fine. Just have them practice it that way. On open strings, and make sure that they have the technique for that. As they're pulling through, it's going to be kind of harder to feel that resistance and stay relaxed as we're going slower. The slower we go, the more students tend to tense up. It's a technique they're going to have to learn eventually. Eventually, they're probably going to want to get to the 12-count bows. 12 count down bows, 12 count up bows, like, the Michael Allen daily warm-ups type of deal. But are they there right now when they're playing Beyond the Thunder? And if the answer is no, and they're not going to get there by the time the concert comes around, use staggered bowings. Break those bows. Just make sure they don't change bows at the same time as their stand partner, and use as legato of up bows as you can. Short bows. There's eighth notes and quarter notes. We're going to have to work these out. And sometimes we have quarter notes and half notes. And so are we in a different place for an eighth note than we are for a quarter note? Well, a lot of times, yeah, optimally. What about quarter note to half note? Are we at a different spot in the bow? Well, yeah, probably that too. So where are we going to be? Optimally, where do we need to be to get our best sounds and to stay together? Because if we're all in different places in the bow, we're probably not going to stay together. And in the next video, I'm going to talk more about tempo and rhythm and how to stay together. But in this one, we need to be able to create uniform bows for those short bow values. I made a teaching companion for this. It's available on teachingorchestra.com. And that's pretty much how I stage this. I have them do whole notes using full bows, and then I have them learn how to do staggered bows next. And then the next thing I do to sequence it is learn the half notes. And I have them start in the lower half and go to the upper half. And then we go to the next shortest note value, which is the quarter notes. And we're going to start at the balance point, and we're going to move past into the upper half of the bow to play those. And then the eighth notes, we're going to have them play in the middle. Then after that, we start adding the rhythms. So we start mixing up our bows. So we have a half note and then two quarter notes. And there's some symmetry there. And then we have some quarter notes and some eighth notes and all that kind of stuff. So as we're playing this in real time, a lot of the times there's rest before the rhythmic values change. So like right here, for instance, rest, rest, rest. And then we have eighth notes, so we can start right in the middle where we want to. But then we've got this rhythm right here. We've got eighth note to a quarter note. So as we up bow this, can we up bow and get to the balance point for the quarter note so that we don't clip this quarter note and make it short? And a lot of orchestras that I hear play this, they clip the quarter notes. They make it into an eighth note because they're in the wrong part of the bow, and they clip it short. And then what happens when they clip it short? They rush. And then this becomes truncated, and then all of a sudden they come in early for measure 13. Again, we've got a rest here, measure 13, now they're playing half notes, so we can move even lower in the bow, so we can play this, and then we've got some symmetry here with the half note, and the quarter note, so it's not a big deal if we're not exactly in the balance point for every time. But then we've got a whole note here, so can we up bow and get back to the frog? So we're going to use the rests to our advantage, and anytime we rest, we're going to make sure that our bows are set in the appropriate place for the rhythmic value that we're playing. And I like to use a method called freeze it, fix it. So throughout the piece, I'm just going to say freeze, and everybody's going to stop, and we're going to look and see where we are in the bow, and it should all be in the same place. If we're starting a whole note in the upper half, that's a problem. So if we make a mistake and we're in the wrong part of the bow, okay, what did we do wrong? Okay, are we thinking ahead? Are we thinking about where we need to be? Are we thinking about how much bow speed we need to use to get to where we need to go? Or are we just kind of putting down the fingers and sawing away? We have to think ahead as string players. We have to think about what's coming up and how to use our bows most effectively. I also like to use my peer-to-peer coaching technique on this too. I'll just have the outside players play, and I'll have the inside players watch, and they'll see where their stand partners are in the bow. Okay, you're playing eighth notes there. Are we in the middle of the bow for those eighth notes? Okay, we're playing quarters. Are we at the balance point? Are we all in the same place? And then flip it around, have your outside players watch your inside players play, and hold them accountable so that everybody's uniform, everybody's bowing it the same way. So for instance, here in measure 35, we have eighth notes in the second violin and viola part, but the previous note is a whole note. And if you have them bow it the way it's written here, this is going to be an up bow, and then they come into a down bow here. So if they use a full bow, that means they're going to be at the frog for this note. Do you want them at the frog here? You could do it that way, and then eventually get back towards the middle. You could add a little bit, you could add a bow lift here and get back to the middle that way. You could play this whole note a little bit slower so that they're at the middle for this. They are playing piano here, so you could probably get away with that. So what's your strategy for how they're going to be in the middle for these notes? And if they're not in the middle, they're at the frog, that's going to be tricky. They're probably going to not stay together, even if a couple of them are doing it that way. In the next video, we're going to take a deeper dive into rhythm and tempo. Make sure that the students are playing the right techniques to be able to play the syncopation, and rushing is usually a big problem for younger orchestras anyway, and in this piece there's a lot of places that can really rush if we don't use the right technique. So if you're having trouble keeping your orchestra together, or if you haven't even rehearsed this before, you're just looking into it, well, I'm going to give you some strategies on what I do in the classroom so that my students stay together and we develop good foundations from the beginning. So I'll see you next time.